welcome back. Welcome back. It's been a while. Welcome back to the show, Indestructible Souls. The podcast is back, and hopefully, we're going to stay on routine. I want to thank everybody for their continued support. And the show is back. It's been a while, been on a long hiatus, and I can only tell you that I've been busy trying to grow the group practice. So, once again, my name is Jonathan Beauregard. I am your host of Indestructible Souls, the podcast for mental wellness for African American men and boys. And there's a lot in the news, there's a lot to talk about. I probably won't get to all of it today. I'm excited to be back. Sorry for starting late. I'm 45 minutes late. Simply because, like I said, life is happening, things are busy. Um, Hanging out with family today. Did some golfing this morning. And there's just been a lot going on, growing the practice. So once again, you could check me out at Beauregard Therapy. Go to BeauregardTherapy.com. I want to thank everybody for their continued support and not only believing in the service that I provide, but also, referring people that are in need. And I am more than glad to help. And so that with all of that being said, there's a lot in the news, and I don't even want to get into all of the stuff that's in the news, but there's the what is that called? The Ukrainian Russia war. I don't understand it. I don't get it. And I just hear a lot of different commentary about it. And something that I don't understand and don't fully understand and don't know how it affects us, it's, you know, try to stay in my lane in lane of understanding. The thing is, I just yet again, it's always baffling how this country picks and chooses what's important and what's not important. I think it's a travesty that any innocent people are being harmed, no matter what culture or whatever it may be. But at the same time, these types of things are going on all over the world and get zero notoriety, um, get zero press, and because it's a European country, you know, and not to mention our former president hobnobbing with this guy. I don't know what to say. I'm just gonna stay in my lane and pray for the people over there and that this thing comes to an end. But we're fighting wars every day. We're fighting battles every day. So how do we pick and choose what's important, or how do we really fully engage what's going on across the waters when we have so many things going on in this country, in our neighborhoods, on a daily basis? So we're constantly seeing war, meaning, I've talked a lot about, trauma, complex trauma in the different ethnic groups, different neighborhoods. And so we're constantly being traumatized and we're constantly at war. So I'm not sure if I have enough empathy to really understand what's going on across the waters when there's so much stuff going on right here in our own backyard. So I'm gonna leave that right there. Um, we see some drama, with these celebrities and social media. My only wish when it comes to social media and the celebrities and all the things is that these young people that's watching it realize that the stuff that's going on and the things that they try to emulate and mimic and strive to be is not real. So my hope is that they understand that stuff is not real. That's not real life, and stop measuring success based off of what we see in social media and all that good stuff. So let's get into the show. I have a pretty good topic that I want to talk about today. Actually going to break it up in several parts simply because there's a lot of context to it. And so a lot of us are in different types of relationships, right? And so whether it's the relationship with your significant other, your husband, your wife, mother, daughter, father, son, and friends, even your common friends, a lot of times there's things that happen in relationships that we wonder why sometimes we walk away from relationships feeling drained, feeling defeated, feeling trapped, and often don't understand why we do the things that we do in relationships, and why so often, even when we're dealing with people that we care about, we feel drained and feel, you know, obligated, emotionally exhausted, frustrated, tired, um, sometimes abused, and all of those things. So I want to talk about a phenomenon that happens in relationships, and isn't just romantic relationships, but this is pretty much in all relationships that can happen if we don't have boundaries, if we don't have boundaries in relationships. So one of the things I want to talk about, or the main thing I'm going to talk about, is something that we call being held hostage emotionally, right? So today it's, are we becoming emotional hostages in relationship? Now, let me explain to you what that means exactly. So a lot of times when we're in relationships, and yet again, I'm using relationships in the broad sense, is that what begins to happen, we see abusive relationships, or we see relationships that are what we call toxic, right? And so those relationships are easy to spot. However, there's other relationships, other things that happens in relationships when a person tries to control the actions of another person, can get their way from another person, manipulate another person, or emotionally abuse another person by what we call is keeping, or having someone become their emotional hostage, especially someone who has poor boundaries, or may not even see it happening. Because the problem is that this happens over time, and by the time we're there, and by the time we're in these relationships where people get frustrated, people feel defeated, people feel all of these things in relationships, by the time we get there, I'm not going to say it's too late, but oftentimes we have been in this situation for months and sometimes years, right? So I want to talk a little bit about, what does it mean to be in a relationship, whether it's romantic relationship, whether it's a mother-daughter relationship, different family dynamics. So I'm not going to narrow it to just romantic relationships, marriages, or anything like that. However, I want to talk about what exactly does it mean to be held emotionally hostage, right? And so oftentimes what happens is, it's real simple. I'm in a relationship with a friend or whoever it may be, and the way they manipulate, the way they control a person, the way they get their way, the way they get their needs met, is by using extreme emotion, in terms of what we call emotional blackmail. Use extreme emotion to get their way, or to get a person to do what they want them to do. And so what happens is, me as the person that's as a victim of that, right? Because I care about a person, or because someone care about a person, those emotions that are thrown at us, those emotions that are projected onto us, become so overwhelming that oftentimes we lose our decision making in the relationship, to where we have to, in order to regain this person's acceptance, or to calm down the situation, or to feel better, oftentimes people will submit to these emotions just to get past the moment, just to regain favor. But the problem is that only one person is left satisfied while the other person is left frustrated, defeated, and so forth. So what does emotional being held, or somebody who uses this type of tactic in relationships, what does it really look like, right? So let's talk about that real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on the definition. What I really want to do is explain or get to the point where we are recognizing these things in relationships. Next week we can talk about how to fix it, and we could talk about solutions to this. But one of the things I really wanted to point out is sometimes we are so frustrated in relationships, and these are people that we love and care about, and we don't understand why. And sometimes people will even anticipate and alter their lives and alter their decisions just to avoid the emotional conflict that they know that's going to happen if that person is unhappy. Just to avoid the extreme emotions, right? So here's a simple definition of someone who's an emotional hostage. Someone who's an emotional hostage is someone who is being held or being manipulated, controlled, or however you want to say it, by another person's emotional blackmail, another person's emotional control. We see this a lot. I see this a lot in therapy, where sometimes couples come to me, and whether it's infidelity or whatever it may be, or some type of abuse, that type of stuff is easy to point out and easy to see. But when we talk about being held hostage emotionally, or the emotional stress, oftentimes what I see is where the relationships begin to go south is when one person has decided to break away emotionally from the relationship. And that's oftentimes where it becomes very difficult, because once a person decides, you know what, I'm tired of being manipulated emotionally, it's tough to get back, because that person has to regain their sense of identity. Now, I got a little bit ahead of myself in the sense that what happens when somebody is being held emotionally hostage, and one of those things is a person lose a sense of identity and a sense of self-control, because their decision making and whether they turn right or left or whatever they do is determined by avoiding the other person's emotion. So if I'm constantly trying to please someone else and making sure that I'm not going to run into this emotional trap, and I have to alter my behavior to do so, then what happens is I lose a sense of self. I digress. So here's what happens, right? So here's what happens in relationships. What does emotional hostage, or someone who's kidnapping you emotionally, what does that look like? It looks like a threat of guilt, right? So if you're not doing or performing, I like to use the term performing. If you're not performing to their standard, then what they do is say things and do things to make you feel guilty and overly exaggerate their feelings and what the consequence of you not doing something for them onto them. So therefore you then now feel guilty and obligated to do things that you normally wouldn't do, or at least have the right. So one tactic is to use guilt. We call it guilt tripping. The other thing is, I'm going to make you feel obligated to do something, and if you don't do it, then you've messed everything up. Or if you don't do it, then I'm going to be unhappy. I'm going to be angry. Things are just not going to go right. So we are forced to do things out of obligation, not out of free will and free choice. So a person who takes people hostage emotionally uses guilt, uses manipulation. They make people feel obligated to make them happy. Here's a big one. They hold other people responsible for their feelings and their emotions. I'm angry or I'm this way and I'm frustrated because you did not perform or you did not do the things that I asked you to do. So therefore, if I'm upset, if I'm frustrated, if I'm angry, it's your fault. So a lot of finger pointing. So when we talk about the things that people do to hold other people emotionally hostage, the other thing that we use is, or people use, is fear. Whether it's fear of physical threat, whether it's fear of, if you don't do this, I'm going to harm myself. If you don't do this, then my life is going to fall apart. One of the things I see a lot is when I have these couples or elderly couples that come with adult children that are still in the home. They want to get rid of them. And when they try to get rid of them, what do you think happens? What do you think happens when someone tries to break up with someone and this other person has this complete emotional meltdown, whether it's threat, whether it's fear, whether it's threat to harm themselves? So therefore, people feel trapped in their own homes because they can't get away because of these emotions that people display. So even using fear is a tactic to hold someone emotionally hostage. If you don't come back to me, if you don't give me money, if you don't continue to take care of my life, so when I go kill myself, it's your fault. That's a classic example of holding someone emotionally hostage. So this type of situation happens when a person has poor boundaries. Now, let me back up before I say that, because it's not always poor boundaries. Not always. Oftentimes, what we mistake love for, or what having a love for a loved one, a friend, a spouse, whatever it may be, oftentimes those things get distorted. What do I mean by they get distorted? Whether I'm a parent, a spouse, whatever it may be, my definition of love potentially becomes distorted. So therefore, when this emotional attack comes, I'll just call it an emotional attack. I believe I'm obligated through love and caring for a loved one, not understanding that I too get to maintain my boundaries. I too get to maintain my self identity. I too get to maintain my sense of decision making independent of anyone else, even if I'm in a relationship. And so what happens is when that becomes distorted, then I'm an easy target to be manipulated or held hostage emotionally. And oftentimes I don't think people understand or even realize when it's happening or how it's happening. And so what happens is these things begin to happen and I don't know why. I don't know why I feel the way I feel, but here we go. Does that make sense? So here we go. at the time when I'm beginning to feel myself lose a sense of self, when I begin to feel like anxious when it comes to decision making, when it comes to engaging someone, that I have to watch out for landmines, I'm already in trouble. If I have to alter the way I move, the way I think, the way I talk, what I would say because I'm avoiding emotional landmines, I'm already in trouble. So, not maintaining my boundaries in a relationship allows me to become a victim of being emotionally held hostage. Because what happens is, I believe it's my job to please someone else or to keep someone else happy. And therefore, I slowly begin to lose a sense of self. And then here's another thing that happens: I stop taking account for my own feelings, and I take responsibility for someone else's feelings while I negate my own. Does that make sense? So I begin to negate my own feelings out of fear, out of obligation, while I become responsible for everyone else's emotions. I see people, adults, not just in romantic relationships, but parents and all these other things, that can't get out of situations simply because they have lost a sense of self, and they're more concerned about what other people think and what other people feel, that now they are literally trapped without chains because they're trapped emotionally. So when we talk about being held emotionally hostage, and I want to take my time with this topic, and I actually am going to have more people on to talk about it because I think it's too important. And honestly, I think it's one of the number one reasons why relationships fail. I think it's the number one reason why people begin to look for comfort elsewhere. Because in a relationship of someone that I love or someone that I care about, I lose a sense of self when I have to make sure I keep this other person happy to avoid this landmine that's going to carry on for months, if not years. So when we talk about emotional blackmail or holding someone hostage, I think it's not only in marriages or couples, but children do it through tantrums, by holding parents emotionally hostage through tantrums and things like that. Parents do it to kids by saying, "You will disappoint me if you do this." We do it in relationships. Well, if you don't perform to what my emotions are, if you don't placate to my emotions, I'm now unhappy with you. So therefore, here come all this smoke. So here's what I want to do. So next week, I want to talk about how to avoid becoming emotionally held hostage. And if you're in a situation that you feel like you're emotionally held hostage, how do you break away from it? This is a very serious topic when we're talking about dealing with relationships and dealing with people. Emotions are very real. Now, here's the thing: this even happens in friendships. And I'm pretty sure, hearing this topic, you could probably look around, whether it's in your family or your own circle, and absolutely know who is holding you hostage emotionally. So I want to thank you for welcoming me back, welcome you guys back to the show. This is our intro to being held, what we call being held emotionally hostage. And next week, we're going to talk about how to break away from it and how to fix it in relationships. And as a side note, once again, you can check me out at Beauregard Therapy. I am recruiting panelists to join me on the show to have more discussions. I will be recruiting more people, more guests. If you're interested in coming on the show and you have a topic that you want to chop it up about, please hit me up at jonathan@beauregardtherapy.com. And I want to thank you for welcoming me back. Sorry for being late. I'm going to work out the kinks and we'll be back at it. So once again, this has been Indestructible Souls, the podcast for Black men and boys, and we're out.